it was all like very strict and just like did lots of holding postures, which is very traditional, and just burned, just the burning. That's all I can remember. It's just like everything burned all the time. And, even though he was doing a very short form, he just hold each posture like 5 minutes or something. It took a whole hour to do that. And he just could barely walk, it was really painful. And then we did push hands after that. And it's just like, it was pretty intense.
Welcome to the Transformations Podcast. Here, guests and I will share our transformative experiences and will explore how to find excellence in life. Well,
Yeah.
Hal Mosher,
Yeah.
welcome to Transformation. Thanks for coming out and hanging out with us for a bit.
Thanks for.
So you started out as in
Cool.
your study of Tai Chi as a student of Robert Smith. Is that where you first got introduced to Tai Chi?
Yeah.
So you must have been in the Maryland area, or
pretty
was
much,
it...
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was in 1982, long time ago.
Yeah. I never met him in person. I corresponded with him, got a few postcards. We had a few phone calls probably in the early 1990s. Yeah. And what made you get interested in...
I just had a friend of mine who had studied with Mr. Smith, and he said, you shouldn't do that Wing Chun stuff. You go study with Mr. Smith. He's much more interesting. And he really said, just go try a class with him. And I did. And Mr. Smith, he was just this guy sitting in a chair, and we just started talking. He wasn't even in the class or teaching or anything. And then he just started telling me jokes. And we just hit it off right away. I was just laughing, and we were having a great time. And then he walked in and started teaching the class. I'm like, oh, I guess he's the teacher, And then I watched the class, and then I talked to him afterwards, and he said, yeah, you can come back if you want. So I did.
Nice.
And I started taking classes. I actually started with Xingyi and Bagua first. And then I learned Tai Chi. After about a year of Xingyi and Bagua, he said, oh, you'd have to learn Tai Chi now. So I said, okay. And then that's how it all started.
Mm-hmm. So what did you find fascinating in the...
I had a lot of... Well, it was all really fascinating, mostly because, Mr. Smith was so animate. And he would just, he worked us really hard, but he'd make us laugh at the same time, So it was really fun, and there was a lot of people there. And they were giving me constant information about sort of background information that I didn't really know yet as we were going along. So I had these good group of friends that were fellow practitioners, and they're all very skilled at what Mr. Smith was teaching anyway, and it was a lot of fun. That's mainly why I kept going. I had fun with it, and it felt good, of course.
Did you hear about stories about his time with the CIA? Or was it more stories about Chen Yanqing?
Yeah. We would sit down and talk, me and Mr. Smith, for hours. And the range of conversation was extremely wide. I mean, he was, as you know, very well read. And he often would, I go to his house, and he'd pick out some books for me to read and think about. And then he'd show me some videos sometimes. And then he would just tell me all kinds of things. We often go and watch boxing bouts on his TV. And then he would criticize them and tell me about them. And, he'd studied with all the boxing greats, and of course he'd done judo for years in Japan. So he really knew about a lot of stuff, not just martial arts. He was very well read and very, just very intelligent person. And he was kind of a mentor to me. I was very young. I was only 18 at the time. So it was really nice to have someone like that in my life. He encouraged me to keep studying like that. And I don't know, it just became it was a very intimate relationship. But he would talk about the CIA quite a bit, especially about, what was happening at the time. And like he knew all the people that were, the Bushes, and he knew them personally. And he wasn't allowed to tell me any real, dirt. But he often told me, he said, um, it's pretty scary what's going on, and don't get anywhere near it. Stay far away from the CIA and FBI and all those people if you can. And I took his advice. That's all that's all I can really tell you. And mostly he said, uh, don't trust what's on the TV. It's all just basically programming. Literally, it's programming our brains and people into their own little pigeonholes, and that's where they want you. That's what we said over and over.
Yeah.
So it was anyway. That was just little piece of snippets of things. He had told me all kinds of crazy stuff I really shouldn't say, to the public because I could get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's Mr. Smith. He'd been around. He'd seen everything. He'd been around the block, so to speak, and it was interesting to have him around and to have his point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, his books, are. Uh, I went to California eventually, because uh, I had to go to school, and he said, "Well, you can go study with Ben Lowe over there," and so I did, and then he he was constantly uh, maneuvering people around. He's kind of a CIA person, so he had me doing one thing, had somebody else doing something else somewhere else, and so we were all kind of like this web of Mr. Smith in a lot of ways. And it was a good web, it was always really nice, and he was very supportive. And whenever I had troubles, I could always call him and ask him, for some advice and stuff. So he was really helpful, and he's the one that really made me go to Taiwan as well. He said I had an opportunity to go to Taiwan and teach English, and he said, "Yeah, go." And then I met my Tai Chi teacher, Mr. Liu, over in Taiwan, who was one of Chen Ching's students, and then it all kind of happened after that, and that was my first trip there, and I stayed there for 6 months, but then I've gone back like more than 20 times now, studying with different teachers and doing push hands and all kinds of stuff.
What was it like studying with Ben Lowe? He's pretty accomplished Sifu as well.
Yeah, he was really intense. Ben was not like Mr. Smith at all. There was no telling jokes. It was all like very strict and just like did lots of holding postures, which is very traditional, and just burned, just the burning. That's all I can remember. It's just like everything burned all the time. And even though he was doing a very short form, he just hold each posture like 5 minutes or something. It took a whole hour to do that, and he just could barely walk. It's really painful. And then we did push hands after that, and it's just like it's pretty intense. But his style of teaching wasn't really for me. I was with him for like 3 years, and I really enjoyed him, and we had a pretty good rapport. But he's just a little bit more militaristic than my flavor. I was looking for something a little bit more on the spiritual slash kind of meditation side of things. And he was very much, though, very strict about each posture looking exactly the way it has to look, and being very, precise on those things, which is good. I really appreciate it. Now, especially being a teacher, I'm like, wow. I mean, to make people do that is tough. So I really appreciate his ability to do that. And I learned so much because of that. And it was hard at the time, as and I was still pretty young. I was still in my early 20s, so it was tough
Mm-hmm.
for me at
Yeah.
that time. At that time you don't want to do anything but kind of party and hang out with girls. So it was challenging, but it was worthwhile. I really, and he gave me a letter of reference also to go see Mr. Leo as well. After I told him I was going to Taiwan, he gave me a letter of reference as well. So I had 2 letters of reference from 2 teachers, and
That was Liao
and then
Shiheng.
that's kind of how that all started too. And
Mm.
then I went back to see him 11 times,
Wow.
over 11 years, basically, or maybe 12. Sometimes I'd go just for a couple of days, and sometimes I would go for a month or 2 or 6. It really depended on how much I could afford,
Mm-hmm.
because I'd have to make some quit. I'd have to make some money, quit the job, and then go to Taiwan, right? And then not really have much work, or maybe a little bit of teaching in between, and just live at the youth hostel and do the best I could to survive and pay for classes, and then make it back, and then have to get another job when I come home, and then you know what I mean. Just get a job so I can quit it in another 8 months or 9 months or something. You know what I mean? It was difficult, but it was worthwhile because once I got there, it was just so great. Mr.
Yeah.
Lowe he was definitely my style of teacher. He was kind of a Buddhist priest, so he was always injecting kind of Buddhist ideas into the Tai Chi practice, which I really appreciated. Um, because when I moved to Taiwan, I kind of got into Buddhism indirectly, just kind of, well, everybody's kind of Buddhist there and Taoist, but it's just sort of like I had this connection with Kuan Yin, and then I started investigating into it a little bit, and it ended up starting to meditate, and then one thing led to another, and there you go. And just became very immersed in Buddhism at that point.
So were you
So
meditating in a Buddhist temple or Guanyin temple in Taiwan, or you just
I
meditated
was
on?
doing at first I was just doing it on my own, because my where I was living was like this little apartment with a family. I was living with a family, and they didn't even have a bed for me. It was just like a piece of wood. So I had a hard time sleeping on it. So basically, what I would do, I was just sit and meditate on it, and then I'd pass out for a couple hours and get up and meditate again, and then have to get up. I have to get up at 5 and train with my teachers. I had like 3 different teachers at the time, so I was doing all kinds of and then and so I train until from like 5:30 to 11 in the morning, and then I have to run off and teach my English classes in the YMCA, and then I come back and study with another teacher in the evening, and then pass out and try to sleep a little bit, and then do the whole thing over again.
Right.
And that's what happened. My first 6 months was pretty much like that.
Were all 3 teachers Tai Chi or
You know,
also Xingyi
it's pretty.
Bagua?
No, Shingi Bagua, some Shaolin. I did Tai Chi with Mr. Leo. I did Shingi and Bagua mostly with Mr. Huang, who's in Taiwan, Taipei. He's still alive. And then I did White Crane, a Northern White Crane with this guy, and I don't even remember his name right now, but he was the cousin of the people I was living with. They were like, "Oh, do martial arts. That's cool." Mike does martial arts. I said, "Oh, I'd love to meet him." And they brought him down and started teaching me White Crane. Really good stuff. Loved it. And
Nice.
then, it was back then. There were so many teachers and so many people doing so much stuff. It was like, you can just go to the parks and you see everything all the time. I've seen just a plethora of teachers, and all of them pretty good. So it's really, I had to be very careful about what I chose, but I think I did pretty good. So
What were some of the different
yeah.
characteristics of your training in Taiwan that might be different from your training in the US?
Oh, it's apples and oranges. It's hard to even compare to me. Um, there's a first of all, once you get there, there's a level of dedication. You know, you're in another country, speaking another language, and not in your culture anymore. So you have no choice but just to dive into the culture because you're speaking, you're living, you're eating it, literally. And um, the martial arts is a wonderful way to get into that culture because it gets you behind closed doors that most people will never see. Mr. Huang was really great about that. He would put me on the back of his bike, and we go running off through the alleyways of Taipei, and he'd take me to people's houses, and you know you know feed me, get me drunk, that kind of thing, and we just had a great time.
Yeah.
And then, but in Taiwan, it's just so it just behooves you to really practice hard because you see other people practicing hard, and you can see that they have accomplishments from their practice when they practice hard. And so you practice hard because you realize it's the only way really to do this is just to train and really train hard. And it gives you a lot of inspiration. It was part of my body, but luckily I was only 20 something, so it didn't really matter. I could recover from all my injuries, and it wasn't a big deal. But I had a really good teachers, and they were really supportive, of course, and but also pushed me really hard. So it was kind of a nice balance. Um, the only thing I had a hard time was really eating. I mean, didn't I'm kind of vegetarian, so it's really hard over there to be vegetarian. There are some vegetarian options, but they're hard to find. Mostly, I just had a great time, and then uh, when I was supposed to stay a couple of weeks longer, but they kicked everybody out because of the Tiananmen Square massacre that happened that June. So they made everybody leave Taiwan, and there was like a big these protests all over Taipei, and people were. It was military law. You couldn't go out at all at night, and even in the daytime, you were restricted just to a couple hours because they were afraid that China was going to invade Taiwan. So they put everything on military lockdown. And then about a week into that, they just said, okay, no non-nationals have to leave the country.
I would say,
Yeah.
imagine that the more times you went back, the more the teachers saw the dedication and appreciation and would kind of bring you more indoors into their teaching.
Right. So mostly when I went back, I went to see Mr. Liu because, finding stuff in Taiwan was very difficult. Like, it's not like it is now with the internet. And back then, there was no trains. The buses were very bad and hard to figure out where you're going and when you're going to get there. And just nothing was reliable. It was really hard. And just to get to Taichung took me forever. I went down there to try and find Chen Yunqing and Chen Yunxiao, but I couldn't find them because, I just went at the wrong time, and apparently it was just one of those things. I literally had to go door to door and knock on people's doors and say, "Do you know where this guy is?" Like that, holding up his name in Chinese, and it was kind of interesting. But after the '89 trip, I decided just to go back into Mr. Liu exclusively because I felt like he was really at this peak of his life in terms of his teaching abilities, and he was just really refining what he was teaching. Every time I went back, he'd gone to new plateaus of teaching and learning and transmitting information that just every time my eyes would just wide open or my jaw would drop because I just couldn't believe like it's changed so much in 1 year and how much he'd evolved. And so I kind of made a promise to myself to try to go back every year so that I could keep up with that evolution. So I just studied for the 2 or 3 weeks I was there, a month, really hard. And then I just try to memorize everything and bring it back and work on it for a year. Then I would go back and then see what I had, if I had done what I was supposed to have been doing correctly. And then if so, I'd try to learn something new and then do it again for a whole another year like that. And that went on for 11 or 12 years. And yeah, and so slow, and he got to know me pretty well. And they got excited when I was coming. I remember because I'd always bring the classics, the Young Style Classics by Douglas Wilde, that gray book. You know that book?
Oh, sure.
It's like anyway, it's it's just like a condensed version of the classics in a little book, which is really nice. So I'd bring it to class and I'd read something, and then I'd say, "Can you explain it?" And then, of course, he'd explain it in Chinese, so we'd have to get it all translated. But he'd go on for like an hour sometimes, just about a few words, and then he'd show you how to do it in the form, and of course, then how to do it with push hands. And so it became like this whole uh, really hashing out of the principles in Tai Chi and how to make them really work and why they're important. And it got really ingrained in my practice. That's where my book really comes from, is from a lot of this real looking at the classics really carefully and studying them from not just a theoretical point of view, but really trying to make it practical and in the forms, not just kind of something you read once in a while and think about maybe. But Mr. Leo really inspired that.
What were some examples of his teaching
Can you hear
method
me?
that increased over the years? Like, is there a concrete example you could share of one of those, where the following
Well,
year?
yeah, the main thing is that the easy way to explain that would be basically he had taken this Chen Manqing's form, which is 37 postures long, and he said it was too long. So he shortened it down to basically 18 into this form we called the five animals. And he was trying to condense all the kind of the Xingyi five elements and the animals from Xingyi and from and a little Bagua. So he he made all the Taiji postures coincide with the Xingyi animals and the
Hmm.
five fists. And then at the end, he'd hold up a ward off and walk in a circle like Bagua. And I'd never seen any other Taiji person do anything like that. So I was kind of like, okay, I was still learning and practicing Xingyi and Bagua, so it made total sense to me. Everything he was doing was like, oh, of course, yeah. And that was like probably around 1991 or no, I think he did that earlier too. And that was probably 1990 and before. And then around 92 or 93, maybe 94, I can't remember. He dropped out even, and then he just did Peng Ji An and ward off, roll back, press and push on both sides in both directions and on one leg in both directions. So he did
Hmm.
all. So again, he was trying to, because he was frustrated with us, I think, because we couldn't really get what he was doing. He was just miles ahead of us. He's like looking down there and he's going, "Oh my God, how am I going to show them how to do this?" So he was just always condensing the form down to its bare minimums.
Hmm.
And then so then he just had these what he called the three part, which is just Peng Lu Jian on both sides, and like I said, and then I think that was frustrating for him too. So then he created something just he called the basics, which is just shifting from one leg to the other and turning, with your feet parallel and then with one foot forward, in the bow stance on both sides, and then he would just add hand positions into that, and so we
Hmm.
weren't stepping at all. So he could just then he refined everything down to that, so that was just the bare essence that you had to get. He said, if you get this bare essence, you can do the form. If you don't bother, because you're just you're going up the hill backwards, basically. So um, that's that's again a lot of this the writings I've done is just really kind of expounded on what that came out, how that all sort of played out over the years, and
Yeah.
then how to apply it, of course, push hands. He was always applying every little articulation in the form. He would apply to push hands all the time. He was just so clear about like, uh, okay, well, what is ward off really doing? What is whirl back really doing, and how does it work in all these situations at any time? And he could, it was like he was doing no posture, but all the postures at once. That was the weird part. It's like it's really hard to explain, but basically, as soon as he put his hands on you, you felt all the postures, and there was nothing you could do about it.
It's like he embodied the concept and the energy of those postures that however he wanted to stand
Yeah,
still had the postures in it.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as you touched him, it was over. Your your center was gone, and he had complete control of your body, and there was nothing you could do about it. You're along for the ride. So I just got really used to that. And he always used a wall. That is, he always pushed us on the wall, and I think that's a really important tool that's missing a lot in
Mm-hmm.
a lot of push hands that I see here in America, even in Taiwan. But it's a really important thing because it makes you relax and not worry about falling or getting hurt. You just kind of know you're going to hit the wall, and then you start to relax and let yourself hit the wall, and then things really start to happen. Things like you really start to notice your tendency to hold on and your tendency to really grab onto that tension that you're holding and not yield and just become this. You want to win all the time. And so there's nothing wrong with winning, but at some point you have to learn to lose too. Yeah, you win by losing. So in Tai Chi, you learn to you use their force against them. So it's actually they're pushing themselves out. You know, that's how you should do push hands. It's not if you do anything of your own, then you changed the translation. You know what I mean? Because you're just translating their force through the ground back into them, right? So if you change the translation, it's not the same words anymore, right? That's what it means. It's just like you've manipulated it. So then you're not. I think ideally Tai Chi should just be yin and yang. So if you're perfect yin and yang, then there's no you there. You know what I mean? There's no you left.
Yeah.
It's just so you we get in the way of Tai Chi, I think, a lot.
I
Tai
think
Chi
that
is the ultimate in efficiency and uh, almost like Zen, moving but not moving.
yeah. So you wrote a book on
And Mr.
Jen.
Lee always said, yielding is,
No, finish your
yeah.
quote.
He said, basically, yielding is the whole system. Because if you yield, then you have a good push.
Right.
If you don't yield, then there's no push. You've already broken up Tai Chi. You've dismantled it. You've changed it to something it's not. So my book really was again a way to like synthesize everything down to its bare minimum in terms of what everybody I think should be trying to practice, which is Peng Jin, basically, which is this first Jin, which is basically this round energy that is in all the postures, not just ward off. A lot of people think Peng is just ward off, and it is technically, but it's not at the same time. Peng means just this elastic, round, expansive energy. And as long as you have that in Tai Chi practice, your Tai Chi is fine. That's what I've found is that when I'm teaching, I find either people are just way too tight, and they're way too collapsed. And so then you have this excess of yin or excess of yang, and it's just not correct, right? So um, that's why I wrote this book, is to kind of make those excesses maybe balance out a little bit. So the trick is to do it, and that's really what I was trying to get at in the book, is how to do the practice, not just to talk about the theory. And basically, it's all based on syncing, right? So syncing in Tai Chi is kind of how everything works. Song Gong is the essence of the practice. So without that Song Gong, there's really not much chance for any yin and yang to happen. So, and it really makes Tai Chi kind of one of its unique pieces, I think, is this Song Gong. But so to do that, and a lot of systems of Tai Chi don't even talk about Song Gong very much, or they talk about it differently than I was taught. So I don't mean to, get on anybody's case or make them upset at me or anything like that. And if you're doing it your way, I'm totally fine with it. I'm just, the way I was taught was you press down in one leg and you release the other. You don't use both legs to move. One leg is, you're using both legs, but in different ways, right? So one leg is yang. It's pressing down. It has root. You establish the root on one leg, and the other leg is empty, which means it's open and it's expansive and it's spacious. And as long as you can feel that in the beginning, then you can do that with your upper body as well. And so, but you start with the legs. And again, Mr. Leo was very, very, very clear about that. And then you work up through the body. So again, that creates like these curves. You have the curves in the legs from bending of them, and that creates this elongation of the spine. So as you sink with the legs, or the flesh should feel like it's pouring down into the ground, like water pouring on the ground. And then the bones rise up kind of like a sprout rising up in the spring. So it's very elastic, the bones, and they're expansive, like again, like a sprout. It doesn't just rise up, it expands as it rises up. So it's this very natural type of movement that you're looking for in Tai Chi. It's supposed to be a Taoist practice, which is really about nature. So, it's really important to think about nature. So when you create everything going down, then you start to feel things coming up. It's kind of like that. As it's all relative motion in this reality that we live in. So and more the flesh can go down, the more you can give your body to the earth, the more the earth Jin is going to lift your body up and create this new body out of this old flesh. You get like this new body that comes up from the ground. And that's really what creates Peng Jin, is this yang comes up and fills it up. That keeps it from being collapsed. The yin goes down completely into the ground, which keeps it from being tight. So the outer fascia should be so loose and open, right? And then the bones should be strong and vibrant. And the inner body, you can say the inner body, is lifted and strong and full. That's yang. So then you've created yin and yang in your body. You have the outer body being yin, the inner body being yang. And this is kind of the birthplace of Bordoff, the posture. That's how it's created. It's not because you put your hands in this position, your legs in this position. No. It's so what often happens is people get lost in the movements. And that's easy to do because we are used to moving, but in kind of a clumsy way, right? So to shift forward and back, we throw our upper body over our feet, right? To go back, we throw our upper body over our feet towards the heels.
Mm-hmm.
In Tai Chi, we don't do any of that. We can't, because then we'd have no center. There's no jump. So you can lose center, but you have to move. And it sounds like, uh, you know, it would never work. But so what you have to do is not think about advancing and retreating, but expanding forward and expanding back from center. And this is a little bit hard to explain, but basically, Tai Chi is always expanding. Either expanding front and back, left and right, or all four at once. So those are the 5 attitudes, by the way. So you have advance, retreat, look left, look right, and central equilibrium. All 4 on the outside are dependent on the one on the inside, the central equilibrium. That is, if you lose central equilibrium, you don't have advance, you don't have retreat, and you don't have look left, and you don't have look right. So if you sacrifice one for the other, you get none. You understand? Because they're kind of like a house of cards. You pull out the center card, the whole house falls. Get it?
Yeah.
So that's tricky, right? Because we want to advance and retreat like we do normally in everyday life. And you can't. Because when you do, like I said, the whole thing falls apart. You just end up using Li, they call it, instead of Jin. So Li is force and Jin is kind of energy or this internal energy. And there's lots of those. And Stuart Allison has got a whole book about those. So there's a whole bunch of writing on the Jins. But I'm just talking about one. Because you get this one, then you have the other 7. That's the good news.
Yeah.
If you have Peng Jin, then ward off, roll back, press and push, and then pull and split and shoulder and elbow all come from ward off. And that's in the classics as well, but it wasn't really hashed out that clearly, in my opinion. And Chen Ching tried to explain it a little bit in his book, The 13 Chapters, the chapter on physics. So I took some of that understanding and kind of expanded that a little bit in this book of mine, because that was really his magnum opus, in my opinion. He really laid out most of the Tai Chi system in that book, and then tried to explain it a little bit. But he came from the acupuncture point of view, because that's what he was. So I'm coming more from the Neigong point of view, but also from the push hands point of view. How do you apply that in push hands? So the Neigong part is basically you want to create this internal body that's active, that's yang. If the internal body isn't doing a lot of the work, then the external body is doing too much.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't have this relationship with yin and yang anymore. So you have to be careful, again, not to want to use the external body too much. And really look inside and check and see if you're really doing an internal practice. Like, can you feel something coming up from the ground? Some kind of force, some kind of, I like to call it electromagnetic force. So it's not so chi oriented, because it's just become a buzzword here in America, and it just doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just been overused, and now nobody knows what it means.
Yeah.
And so I just go back to the scientific terms of bioelectromagnetic fields. That's all we're doing, is creating an electromagnetic field in our body. It's called a torus, right? And that's all over the web. You can just type in torus into the web and it'll come up. But what we're just doing in Tai Chi is increasing the torus shape. We're re-energizing it, like plugging in your cell phone. Mm-hmm. And so the problem, that's what Peng Jin does on the healing aspect, is once you plug in the cell phone, then the cell phone is charged, right? And then all the organs can work properly, and then the body can move without any hindrance, and all of a sudden everything starts to fit together. All the form pieces start to fit more closer together. They all start to link up with Peng Jin. They all become one form instead of all these different moves. It's actually only one move. It's only one. It's Peng Jin, right? Peng. So if you have that one, then you have all. If you don't have that one, again, you don't have anything. So it's kind of like that. And so when you do push hands, you have to again, remember those 5 attitudes, not when they push on you, you don't run away, right? Yielding doesn't mean run away. Actually, yielding means you take their force into the ground. So you don't have to run away to do that. In fact, you can't, because then you lose their force when you run away, right? That's the definition, right? So at the same time, you can't push against their force, right? So in the class it says no resist, no let go. So you can't push against their force, because then you don't get their force either, right? You've just dismantled it. So you have to absorb their force into the ground and then create, that's the peak of yin, right? You've taken all that yang and you put it in the ground, which is the peak of yin. And then that creates peak yang, which means the yang comes up through your body and you translate it back to them. And that's push or roll back or pressed or ward off. It doesn't matter. It just looks different, but actually same. It depends on the angle of their push and of their attack a little bit. That determines the different shapes and the postures. That's all. They can push on your shoulder, they can push on your hip, they can push wherever they want. It doesn't matter. But you have to be able to respond in the right angle at the right time. So that's what Peng Jin does. It gives you that connection. So Mr. Liu was really big on the whole body has to do it. You can't isolate pieces. If you isolate something, then it's not part of the whole anymore. So I know some people, they don't care about moving as a unit, and that's okay. But I was taught this way, that everything has to move together, kind of like a gyroscope.
Yeah.
That once the gyroscope starts moving, the whole gyroscope is moving, and its momentum carries with it that movement, which carries more movement and more momentum. And it just becomes like this Energizer bunny. It just keeps on going. It doesn't. You don't need to add anything to it. And that's what Peng Jin does. It encapsulates that gyroscopic movement. It feeds it back on a loop, so that it never degenerates. And that's why it's really good to practice every day with this in mind, because all of your body reorganizes itself according to Peng Jin. That is, it becomes perfectly efficient, because circles are the most efficient shape, right? Because there's no projections, there's no indents. It's perfectly smooth in all angles. And because of that, it can store energy. All living things are built out of circles, really. Everything has to turn together. That's what Mr. Lee always said. Everything has to rotate like a wheel and turn like an axis. So he broke that down into two movements. One is vertical, the other is horizontal. Right? So most people talk about this vertical movement or vertical circle, but this horizontal circle, not a lot of people talk about. But I don't think of them as circles anymore. I think of more of it as expansion. So you're expanding from the ground up with that yang force, and yin down, and that creates the circle. Is that expansion? And to go left and right, you have to expand right to go left, and expand left to go right. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And that is out left and right. And then eventually you want to have up and down, left and right equalized in all places at all times with expansion. And so what you do is you establish the root, and then the root becomes the place of the expansion's origin, its birthplace. And then the root just comes up through your body, and you are just an expression of the root that's expanding. And as soon as they touch you, in push hands, you expand through them. You know what I mean? They might go forward or back, left or right, doesn't matter. You've already expanded all the way around their body energetically, you know what I'm saying? So they call that Na-jin, right? There's the three jins: Hua Jin, Na Jin, Fa Jin, right? Hua is the neutralizing energy. That's just taking all that force into the ground. Na Jin is the force comes up, and then you cover them with it. And then you can feel their whole body because it was their force to begin with,
Mm.
right? So it's not anything foreign to you or them, it's just them. But now you can feel all their fascia,
Mm.
and you can feel all the misaligned pieces of their circles, right? And when that happens, Fajin's easy. You just expand through that place that's collapsed. And then, so that's, again, so you can apply the principles very clearly this way, I think. It seems very clear to me. But of course,
Well, it seems
may not be.
clear, and conceptually it's clear, but I think to
Right,
physically do it is difficult because,
right.
right? Like when you talk about, you know, put your root in one leg, right? So the root goes
Yeah,
down. Well,
yes.
when you're leaning backward or leaning forward or taking a step forward, both
Hmm.
feet are on the ground, sometimes 70
Yeah,
30 or 50 50. So are you just picking
yes.
one? It's not like where there's an empty step, right? That's easy for me to understand. But when you've got one
Right.
foot in front of the other, you can't lift your back foot off the ground,
Hmm.
you'll fall, right? If you lift your front foot off, you'll fall. So both have to have a root. So are you throwing 70% in one, but not 100, right?
You can go 50-50. You can
Mhm.
be single weight 50-50. It's not about the weight distribution.
Okay.
It's
So
about the
just,
distribution of yin and yang.
mhm.
You understand? Mr. Leo, he didn't always push it at weight forward or weight back. He'd push it 50-50. He'd push it 60-40. He'd push it wherever he wanted. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Because he's always distinguishing yin and yang anywhere, and root can go anywhere you want it to go.
Mhm.
You don't have to be on one foot even. You can be on both. You can be sitting in a chair, right? Or you can just stand up and be talking and still have root once you're good at it. And he told me you could put the root anywhere in your body you felt like. I can't do it, but maybe he could do it. I don't know. I, but anything's possible. That's the thing about Tai Chi. We think that certain things just aren't possible. But I've seen some things I didn't think were possible in my travels over there. Things I thought. I mean, he pushed out some guys that were like karate champions. Like twice his size. They were just like feathers in the wind. Nothing. I'm like, I don't know how he did it, but doesn't mean I didn't see it. So there's some stuff going on here that's a little bit. Uh, that's what the internal part I think is. It's kind of hidden, right? So you have to always try to cultivate that part because it's not obvious,
Yeah.
and because of that, it makes your life worthwhile. You actually start realizing what's important in life is not collecting stuff, but actually cultivating this inner person, inner body, this really rich life when you have that, because you're always happy. You're not looking for happiness outside. You're looking for it in the right place inside. So you're always satisfied because you cultivated that something inside. So again, what helps a lot are also the six alignments. Because that allows you to feel the advancing and retreating and going left and going right without losing them. See, like this, it's really hard to advance and retreat and still be balanced, right? Or this, or any of those problems. So that's why all these other principles are there, is to help you to like refine your form down so that you can feel the expansion in all places at all times and not lean and not shift on a gross level, I call it, by pushing the weight forward and pushing the weight back, but by dissolving one leg to put the weight forward and dissolving to put the weight back and getting really fluent at that. And the beauty of that is you can't see the weight moving, right? Only I feel it. The person on the outside, I might look like I'm 50-50, but I have no weight on one leg. You understand? So you
Mhm.
take away all telegraphing at that moment. There's no telegraphing if you can do that. And this is, again, Tai Chi was trying to refine, I think, Xingyi and Bagua, down to its most essential level. Like what's really we need to practice. And then do all, Xingyi and Bagua have so many forms. There's animals and 64 and all this stuff. And and so the Tai Chi form, I think, was just a refinement of all the animals and all the 64 and all the circle walking into one form. And that's the Tai Chi form. Because Mr. Liu just confirmed again what I believe as well. He made that form just very clearly. It's like, oh yeah, you can do it all in one practice. It's supposed to be like that. I always look at the forms as kind of archaeology, trying to figure out what's the oldest form and what's the original. What was the original and what did it really look like? And there's some great old videos out. You've seen, I'm sure. And things have changed, even in the last 100 years, right? The forms have really changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And some for the better, some for the worse. But for me, I think it's important to look at the beginning, if we can. Look at the old stuff and see how it's different from now. And see how people have changed it. Because it's just what happens over time. People just change stuff. It just happens.
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of a teacher, I always want to go back and try to find the original essence. That's why I wrote this book, is because I was trying to get at the original essence. Like, okay, let's just focus on that, and not only silly differences in the form, but what you really need to practice. We don't have time for all those differences and arguments about who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
That's how I feel, But a lot of people, that's what they love to do. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time in Taiwan, and there's a lot of that going on.
You can
Here in
argue
America, too.
but
All day. And
when you
everybody's
apply
right.
it, right? Just the application needs to lead the principle, lead the form, right?
Exactly. That's why I teach application every single move in my Tai Chi form. When I teach, from a punch, a grab, hook, and then a wrestler throw. We do drills for every single posture in the form for all those. And I try to make that very clear, that you need that baby step before you get to push hands. Mostly because you need to know what the angles are. You need to know what the thing can do before you refine it down to its push hands level, where everything's just so small, but still there, right?
Yeah.
But first you have to see the gross before you can see the subtle. That's my thing. I think people need bigger movements in the beginning, so their brain registers what the hell's.
Yeah.
And then once they get the big movement,
circle shrinks like a spiral to a point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly like that. But the main thing, I just think the form needs to be really full, and that it should make the body feel open. And this is really important. If your body's not open and you're doing Tai Chi, then there's a problem. You have to really try to get the body open and then do Tai Chi, maybe, or do it so much that your body is open.
Yeah.
And every joint has to separate. There's no compression in Tai Chi. All the joints have to, starting with the spine, all the spinal column has to separate. All the discs have to uncompress. That's Peng Jin. That's what Peng Jin does. Disc uncompresses the discs, uncompresses all the joints in the knees and the ankles and the wrists and the elbows, everywhere. So all those fluids in there aren't compressed anymore.
Right.
And then the body gets a break, because all that compression creates stress, which then creates all kinds of problems, from inflammation to just pain in many different ways, right? So any way you can get away from this compression of the joint is really a good thing. And that's why we're different than running, for example. We don't want to compress the joints in Tai Chi. We want to open them and uncompress at least, the hips and shoulders. Those are the two main ones that are really, and the neck, get really compressed, and then they cause a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I do body work. Oh, I have videos for all this on YouTube, by the way, as well.
Okay, we'll include your links for all your
Yeah,
websites and
I have like
YouTube,
100 videos.
email in the show notes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's one of
Just,
the first
I'm not,
principles of Tai Chi is,
what?
just one of the first principles of Tai Chi is stand as if your head is suspended by a string,
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
And that kind
But,
of lifts you up.
yes. But you also should feel the ground lift you up. So what I do is I
Mhm.
tell people, feel like as your flesh goes down into the floor, feel like your insteps where your bones are there, like there's a bubble there, lift, like energy coming up, lifting up your insteps, and that lifts up your kneecaps, separates the joint there, and
Mm.
that goes into your hips and separates the joint into your hips, and then that goes through each spinal vertebrae and separates each one. And then it goes under your armpits and opens your armpits and opens the shoulder joint, the shoulder girdle a little bit. And then the elbows, wrists, and everything, then all the way up the neck. And then it ends up at the top of the head where you have this perfect circle on the top of your head, right? The crown. And you feel
Yeah.
that be lifted up from the ground.
Mm.
And then what happens is heaven comes down and suspends you because you've lifted up towards heaven from the ground. That is, you've addressed earth so much that you've created heaven. Peak of yin, peak of yang. And so in that moment, heaven comes down and then relaxes your body again, and you go more into the earth, and then lifts up your bones more. And it becomes this constant cycle, and they call that the microcosmic orbit, right? And it just goes up the spine and down the front, but it's really that earth heaven relationship changing is
Right.
what you need to feel, right? Because they believe that when you die, those two places, they separate. When heaven and earth are gone in your body, you're dead. It's the Chinese Taoism, right? So to keep you alive longer, you want to bring them both into the body, into the three dantians, and keep them there, heaven and earth, as much as you can. At the same time, open the three gates in your back, right? When you open the three gates, then the energy can go up the spine, easy, right? So the form is supposed to do all that. In fact, the whole time you do the form, you should be doing the microcosmic orbit. But most people just do it at the beginning, at the end of the form, maybe, or they sit.
Right.
But really, you're supposed to do it in every posture. And actually, every posture is to open a different. So, like rollback is for the lower gate, right? Press is for the mid gate, right? And some address two or three gates and one. You know what I mean? They're all
Mm-hmm.
just different ways to open the gates. It's really ingenious, I think. Whoever made this stuff up is just wow. They really thought about it and really understood the body.
Yeah.
Because the fascia needs to be really smooth in this practice. Because if it's not, then it becomes, it just crystallized and hard. It just doesn't work. It just feels terrible. You know, I know from experience and giving people body work, that kind of crystallized fascia is just not healthy.
Yeah.
And so Tai Chi is, I want to encourage people to try to practice this. It really can save your life and make you feel so much better. And this Peng Jin idea is the quickest way to make yourself feel better. It can heal your body because if you have Peng Jin, then you have space in your body. There's no space, the air can't go. That means you can't breathe. That means the blood can't move, which means you lose blood flow. It's bad. That also means you can't move your joints. There's no space. It's only because of space we can move,
Right.
right? So you have to get away from this compression and have to open everything up gently and constantly. Otherwise, It just literally starts to shrink on you, especially as you get older.
I read in your book you
Yeah.
talk about the 13 postures, doing the 13 Tai Chi postures or Peng Jin postures as if they were Neigong exercises, or treating them as Neigong. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah, sure. So basically, when everything's upright, balanced, uniform, and even, you have the first uh, posture, right? Peng. And there's 13, but really they're all there's only 8, because the first 5 are the 5 attitudes, and they're kind of injected into all of the 8. So there's actually more than 13,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be technical, mathematical about it. But really, if you can just get the 5 in one posture, that's what you do. That's what being upright, balanced, uniform, and even means, is that everything's doing this posture, basically. There's nothing not doing it. And so, how you do that internally is, again, like I said before, the outer body pours into the ground, and you give the outer body, the old body, that's just not working for you, just give it to the ground. And then what happens is, uh, as you get familiar with that, something starts to come up right through your, you can think through your bones, and right along the uh, through your bones, you feel this kind of juicy, kind of warm, very elastic and energetic feeling that just is basically this yang force. And it just goes, like I said, it goes up through all your joints and fills you up. And then what it does, it allows, because the joints aren't compressed anymore, then like the lungs can open, right? Because there's no compression on the lungs, because of the chest and the ribs, right? So, or the shoulders, the shoulders can compress the lungs a lot. So if the shoulders are open, then you can breathe better. That's an easy way of thinking of it. So when things are open, and as this energy comes up, it opens everything, like the spine. So also when the spine is compressed, again, you have this problem of not being, it's just not comfortable, and it hurts. And basically, it also compresses the nerves that go into the organs, so the organs don't work as well, and all these other problems happen. But anyway, the antidote, again, is to let all the tension go in the ground, and then let this earth energy, earth can move up through your body and open all your joints, and then open all your organs, and then open all your blood vessels, then open every cell, then open every ligament, every tendon, until the whole body is open with this earth jin. At that point, you go all the way up to the head top with this opening, until the whole body from head to toe is completely open with this earth jin. And then at that point, the the heaven jin just rains down, just like rain, just comes and covers you, and you kind of get this feeling of being washed by the heaven jin. And what it does, it expands. The heaven jin moves everything apart more laterally. So the earth jin kind of lifts everything. Heaven jin kind of spreads everything laterally, like a cloud moving across the sky. And it spreads, and it also creates more space where there wasn't created by the vertical spreading. So these two internal spreadings are really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't force them. That's the real tricky part. You can't think, oh, I'm just going to do it. No, it's kind of like you have to think so much for so long that there's this byproduct of the thinking that happens. And once you feel that, you start to understand what yin and yang means, in my opinion. Because you realize it doesn't matter where you're shifting or where you're turning or even what the posture looks like. But all this energetic field that you're creating by going down and coming up over and over and over. So, when you have two things going different directions, you've created an energetic field, right? Just like on a battery, you have positive, negative on both sides, right? And that creates a field in between. Same here. You create that field between you standing on the earth and the heavens above you. You've created a magnetic field. So the thing is, you have to move that through the battery, which is your body, right? So to move it through, you have to find a way to get it to come up. And the only way to get it to come up is first everything has to go down, which is the hard part,
Is standing in
right?
like,
Because we're really attached to our old body.
yeah, right. Muscle memory.
Yeah, standing practice is very, very helpful, but don't get stuck in it. I find a lot of people think it's just easier to do standing practice, so they just do that.
Right.
And but your standing practice should be moving. So even though external moving, not moving, sorry, internal moving a lot. Okay, when you're doing the form and you're moving internally, very still, right?
Right. It's
But
opposite.
you can in the form you can alternate that a little bit. So like maybe at the posture you can have internal movement, external strength for a split second, you know. So the postures are there because they wanted to show you, oh, you can pause there. You can take a look at that because that's a signature in that posture that you need to pay attention to, right? And then you move on. Question is, how do you move on? That's the it's a hard part, right? Because again, then we get attached to the posture, and we lose the transition. The transitions are the postures, and the postures are the transitions. You can't think like dualistically. Then you start to see each transition, each piece of the transition is a posture, right? And then you have to find Peng Jin in every transition, in every posture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is that yin and yang piece again. And they're all slightly different, but with the same kind of overall feeling.
And I'm thinking though that for a beginner or somebody who's tense, they have a lot of connective tissue kind of glued together or fused together from lack of mobility over
Yeah,
years and decades. That
yeah,
starting out,
yeah,
maybe standing in Wuji or something, is the first way to start thinking
yeah,
relax and sink, right? Without having to think of the form movement at the same time.
yeah,
And body work helps a
right,
lot with loosening that in physical therapy, but just
yeah,
exercise, right? Moving the range of motion.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Motion exercises are really helpful. There's a bunch of them on the web. You know, Mr. Huang from Malaysia, he's got one, the 5 loosening exercises. Those are really great
Yeah.
and easy enough to do, and they'll help loosen your shoulders at least, maybe your hips. And you can start with those. I mean, those are really easy. And then from there, you can do standing practice after that. And you can alternate between them. You know, you can do like little loosening exercises, then standing practice, then more loosening exercise, and a little more standing practice. I tend to stand with the postures and the form, you know.
Yeah.
So I just take a posture. I usually do 2 postures, and I just do 2 postures for a whole week. And I stand in those, and I teach that's how I teach. And I just work on those 2 postures with my students for a whole week. And I find actually a week's not long enough to do 2 postures, actually. It's really hard to get everything I want to do in 2 weeks, in a whole week with 2 postures.
Right.
There's so much there. They're like these little puzzle boxes, right? They just keep opening up, and you find more treasures inside. And the more you know how to unlock them, the better it gets. Then I really start to see it's not about the posture, but it's about the Jin it's trying to express.
Mm.
And then that shows me actually the essence of that posture is the Jin is trying to express in that posture.
Right.
And so all of the 8 Jins, Peng, Lu, Ji, Jiao, Kao, Jia, Lia, are just expressions of the Jin, right? They're just these expressions. But they're the most important. So if you're doing a form, I tell people try to have all of those 8 postures in your form somewhere, because you need to know what those are feel like and how they're different from each other. And then you should, and in terms of push hands, you should try to practice those 8 as well, because the push hands will show you how the Jin works, not just how it feels, but how it works.
Right.
And that's what I think the system was set up to do, was to show you how the postures look, and then how the Jin functions.
Hmm.
So you learn the form just to see kind of the general shape, and then you you refine it down to just the Jin.
And then you refine it more, and there's no posture, right? I mean, it's just like you're saying with Mr. Liu, he can just stand any way
Yeah,
he wants, and it's all
yeah,
there, you
yeah.
know.
It, everything is everything.
Yeah, everything and nothing.
It's like
So
that.
your book on Peng
But
Jin
it
is
makes it
available
beautiful.
on Amazon,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yep, I'll include
Yeah.
a link for it in our show notes so people can find it, and also your website, which is
Thanks.
quite nice, and
Hey,
your
thank you.
YouTube channel. And
Yeah, people are welcome to email questions. I talk to people all over the world about this stuff and have a good time with it.
yeah, you see, you get very animated when you're talking
Thanks
about
a
it.
lot.
You know, it brings up all your energy. So that's great. A lot of
Yeah,
teachers in the old days are just clammed up, you know, and now we're here
I know.
trying to bring it out.
Well, I want this Tai Chi system to keep going as long as it can. I think because I really could help people, especially in this Western culture. They really, really need it. They just don't
Yeah.
even know about it. And there's a lot of misconceptions about Tai Chi, just what they see in the movies and the TV and stuff. And people don't understand basically what it's about. And so I'm just trying to educate and also to bring, get people enthusiastic about it. I also lead trips to Taiwan and bring people over there and have them train with teachers there.
Thank you so much, Hal. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Bye, Mark.